Well, hey, Wolf, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How about you?
Doing great. Thanks so much for coming on. I've been enjoying Palladium for quite a while, and it's a treasure to get to chat with you today. Um,
Great.
Wolf, could you just give a brief bio and maybe some of the big things you're interested in?
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I was trained as an engineer in Canada, mechanical engineering, and I worked in that for a little while on fuel cells and some other sort of green technology stuff. And then I got bored, I guess, and realized there were other problems, or that maybe engineering wasn't what we needed. The biggest problems that we were faced with weren't actually engineering problems. We know how to solve those problems, and it was other kinds of barriers that were sort of holding back progress. And so, I went and tried to find my own thing, tried to find my own path for a while, and ended up building an intellectual network around looking at the problem of governance. And then recently, I don't know, it's recently in my story. It's not so recent now, but 3 years ago, 2018, we started Palladium magazine, which was basically to serve as the flagship magazine of this network that these ideas that I've been putting together with my friends around governance. We wanted to basically have a magazine where we could represent a point of view outside of what's sort of currently the mainstream view, but not getting into sort of the fringe edge, whatever, that sort of dominates the kind of alternative conversations. We wanted something that was really putting forth kind of a real alternative way of thinking, and to develop that. It was an open-ended project, right? We'd identified these problems, but we hadn't identified fully solutions. So we wanted to kind of have this open-ended intellectual project of how are we to understand the historical moment, and how are we to understand what's holding us back and where we have to go. So, and we kind of centered that around this conversation about governance. Anyway, so that's my story and the story of Palladium. Happy to answer more questions if there's more detail you want anywhere in there.
That's great. Well, Wolf, was there a single moment where you realized, okay, governance, that's the big challenge I need to work on, or was it kind of a slow slide, like it just kind of accumulated?
Oh man, yeah. So since sort of, I don't know. I sort of have this saying that I sort of like became sentient at 15, um, I don't know. It's weird. There was this click where I started thinking about issues larger than myself. And I think it was around then. It was sometime kind of high school, right? And since then, I've always been thinking about sort of the grand fate of things. Where are we going? What should we be doing at the highest level? And now, obviously, that was quite a bit before what I'm talking about with zeroing in on governance. But that's kind of this spirit that's in the background. So I had always been studying things and trying to figure things out and formulate my ideas and put forth my ideas and all this. And then I think sometime around 2011, 2012, 2013, I really got into a bunch of new ideas and sort of very deeply changed my view of the world. And I wouldn't say it was like a singular moment, but there was sort of a
Yeah.
definite transformation there. And then from that still wasn't quite the governance thing. That was where I started to see new problems, and I started to really see things in a different way. I think I had a more like naive viewpoint before that, and I really kind of opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I looked at these problems that we could see, and I realized they were basically governance problems, that something had gone wrong in government. And and that took a long time, a lot of reasoning to figure out like what is actually the right way to push on this. Like even something that's sort of, you think, oh yeah, it's obviously a governance problem. Well, there's all these like different approaches, right? Do you start a company? Do you start a political movement? Do you start, do you just talk about it intellectually, or do you
Right.
just raise awareness? Like there's all kinds of things you could do there. But I realized that actually the big bottleneck, after obviously talking about this with my friends and collaborators for quite a while, we realized that the big bottleneck was we actually don't know what we're doing with running a civilization. We don't have a clear paradigm for that. The paradigms we do have are in my opinion, not very good. I could say more strong things than that, but I'll leave it at that. um, yeah, so we were like thinking this problem through, and we realized, okay, what we need here is to really think this problem through and really come up with better solutions. And once you have better solutions, once you have convinced the powers that be, or whatever powers will be, on the fact that we should govern civilization well and how to do that, and then built the institutional structures necessary to do so, then suddenly all these other problems become obviously problems that just get solved as a consequence of approaching the core problem correctly. So that was my reasoning. I'm not going into detail on what the particular problems were, because I don't think that they matter. It was just, things that had piqued my interest, but I realized that there was this sort of problem of governance that was much bigger than that.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Do you think there's anything about your perspective that's informed? You're from British Columbia, is that correct? Or at least you went to school.
Yeah, that's right. Columbia? That's right. I'm actually in British Columbia right now. I've escaped from California for COVID. It was not as useful to be paying Bay Area rent, So I came back to British Columbia to be with my family and spend the summer up here on the beaches.
It's a beautiful place. I spent a day there on a layover while going to China a couple of years ago, and it was beautiful. But yeah, do you think there's something about being like kind of like on the board, like you can almost peek over and look at America and see all the problems we have from almost a third party perspective? Do you think there's something to that maybe helped formulate some of these ideas?
Yeah, there's a few things. So, I mean, I think the first and most obvious result of my living in British Columbia is I'm something of an environmentalist. So this, I grew up in it. We grew up going out into the woods, being very engaged with these conservation efforts and so on. Because in British Columbia, it's very obvious, right? You go out in the woods and you see these beautiful old growth forests, these incredibly majestic, dignified beings, these trees, right? And all the whole ecosystem is built around that. And then you see these black hole clear cuts, right? And it's like, oh man, we've got to be doing something better than that. So that's one of the deepest things, and that comes through in Palladium occasionally. It's not central to us, but it's something that I think it's important, so I put it in there. I don't think it causes a problem. The second thing is, I think, as a Canadian, or growing up as a Canadian, at least, I am actually an American citizen, but I didn't really receive an American political education. So gotcha. I don't have some of the same commitments and prejudices and, in my opinion, false models that I see among my American friends. And we could go into detail there if you want, but basically there's a lot of really subtle cultural stuff that is very different. Coming down just to things like, we would have friends, outside the city who are, we're like kind of urban, secular, or whatever. I was raised Unitarian. And we have these friends outside the city. They're traditional Christian kind of conservative types.
Yeah.
Small business owners out sort of almost in the wilderness, and we'd be friends with them, family friends, no problem. It's like you vote for different parties. Occasionally, there's an argument about it on some family trip or whatever. But like, it was very tame politically. Yes. In terms of like political divides. That's one of these big things where. I like to say the PSYOP doesn't cross the border.
This is really interesting.
There are no bumper stickers in British Columbia. There are bumper stickers in Washington, and it's just that somehow a lot of the emotional investment in the political process is not there in Canada, specifically the American political process, which is the one that has sort of the most international importance. Anyway, so I think that actually did affect my worldview, and it affects my way of approaching things. I have fewer of the sort of deep emotional commitments to certain things that other people do have. The third thing is that Vancouver is this interesting little time capsule where, you know, Canadian government isn't very ambitious. The Vancouver government isn't very ambitious. I think they should be. In both cases, they aren't. Um, Canada is not part of the United States, so it's a little bit neglected from that perspective. Vancouver obviously falls under that label. So Vancouver is this little kind of forgotten place. And the interesting demographic result of that is you get a lot of people who escape from East Coast institutional kind of upper middle class official life. They come to Vancouver in the last generation, or they come from other places in the world where they're just kind of like fleeing the process of history or whatever, right? And they end up in Vancouver, and their kids are still from these ambitious backgrounds, but now in this very unambitious place. And so you get an interesting, Vancouver has this interesting underground of very interesting young people. They tend to leave, but occasionally things happen. And one of the things that happened was my network. We, a bunch of us randomly found each other through various means, including the internet, and just a bunch of sort of ambitious young people who were really interested in some of these larger issues, but had no existing structure around us that was engaging us with them. Anyway, so that's this. I don't know if that argument is coming through clearly, but I think there's something there that there is this like weird kind of underground, not even a single underground, but just a phenomenon that has happened in Vancouver in the last, like, let's say 30 years.
That's really cool. That's really interesting, and it kind of paints like, you know, the catalyst for Palladium and the network. I really like that. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, like the editors of Palladium. So Jonah and I founded it. Jonah and I are both from Vancouver. Ash has been working with us pretty much the whole time, and he's now the editorial team is now me and Ash. We're all from Vancouver, and a lot of our best writers as well. So so there is this little Vancouver circle that kind of kicked the thing off.
That's awesome. The Vancouver mob. I'm curious, what are some of those narratives, you know, that, you know, we get indoctrinated with here in America that you see and as an outsider, you're like, wow, you know, one I can definitely see just internally is like American exceptionalism. You know, we're exceptionally fat, we're exceptionally, you know, perhaps arrogant, you know, and there's all these things. And, you know, but then we are exceptionally wealthy as well. So, you know, there's like trade-offs. But what are some of the big narratives that you see as probably problematic and bad for American growth and development, if that makes sense at some spiritual level?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. So one of them, these are very subtle, like I mentioned, so it's hard to really articulate, at least the ones that really get me. I mean, there's some of the obvious ones, right? Just in terms of like party divide, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But one of them is a certain orientation towards career and relationships, which is more shallow. I'm not comparing to Canada here. Canadians may well be just as bad. Whatever it was, though, my way of thinking ended up a little bit different than this. And so I'm critiquing American way of thinking from my perspective, not necessarily a Canadian perspective. Again, I'm also American. So anyways, yeah, there's this particular sort of careerism, this individualism around career and relationships and material commitments that I think is really harmful. People have this ideal of kind of this middle class life. They have this ideal of kind of progress in their career. You know, everyone wants to be a leader. Everyone wants to be a founder. They very, very sort of instrumentalized relationships in that sense, but in my opinion, in a shallow way. And
gotcha.
And so it really does come down to this individualism, and in a negative connotation, there is a negative aspect to individualism, which is that you are unable to coordinate with other people in a deep manner, and like in almost a spiritual manner, you have a hard time actually connecting with other people in ways other than, I mean in any way, but in the particular ways of politically, which is, I think, man is a political animal, right? You need to connect with other people politically in the sense of actually forming a lasting, coordinated relationship where you are, where your loyalty is to each other, and not to other things. And that kind of thing I see as extremely important and extremely valuable. And I've been frustrated with a lack of that occasionally. Another one, is the emotional commitment to the fate of the country. And this seems obvious. Like, obviously, you should be invested in your own nation.
Yes.
You should be invested in the systems of government that it has. You should be invested in that way of life. On the other hand, I think the current moment of history is the process of that thing dying, and something new maybe will come to replace it. And I think the productive mindset right now is not one of emotional commitment to the thing. And I say this with some pain, because obviously it's a tragedy when something great is dying. But I see people dragged down psychologically by that in a way that is not actually warranted. And I don't want to let the people who don't care about the thing off the hook, because there's a lot of people who don't care about the thing, and they are even more wrong. Perhaps they sort of fragrantly undermine it, or work against its interests, or just sort of disregard the ways they are in fact still existentially tied to the thing. And so that's sort of this other error. But yeah, I think in particular, I actually count that as the same kind of error. It comes out of somehow, I'm not sure I can articulate this, but I think it's the same kind of error. It's something about commitment to somehow the tribal narrative about what America is.
Gotcha.
And one side is going to be overcommitted to its current forms and current existence, and the other side is going to be overcommitted to ignoring and disregarding the commitment they actually have. Anyway, so I'm going to pause there and leave it at that. Those are things that I think are unproductive about America's kind of relationship to itself.
I think both of those are incredibly important and perhaps quite underrated. I grew up in red state America, and now I live in a big metropole. It's kind of the opposite. And I go back, and every time I go back, once every 2 quarters or so, I'm just blown away at the divide and how much it's grown in the last 3 months, and how far. I mean, it feels like 2 different countries. I mean, it's which is something it seems like you don't experience in Canada, which is it's mind blowing to me.
We didn't, unfortunately, with the internet. The PSYOP does cross the border a little bit more than it used to.
It's quite entertaining. So I did have a question, and it's based off some of the things you said about, repeated games and individualism being a bit of a problem. Yeah. I look at and I see governance in the U.S. seems to have been getting worse and worse, especially since the 70s, sometime in the 70s.
1973.
Is this something you feel too?
This is visible in the graphs, right? You look at any graph. I mean, there's a website. I think it's
what the heck happened
in 1971 or something. I disagree. I think it's 1973, but whatever. I can never figure out what exactly the catalyst event was, but it's somehow the old order broke down and the new order came in. The new order was not committed to progress in the same way, or not committed to the same kind of progress. It had a new vision of progress. And some of that was good and some of that was bad, but it's very obvious that the core central institutions of our society and the industrial complex have been neglected since the early 70s.
I definitely feel this. I'm from a mill town, and if the mill, it's gone. There's no opportunities. Deaths of despair are all over the place.
Right.
It really it makes you wonder. Do you have any idea? Was it just the New Deal? I mean, and why is like overdetermined in this case? I know, but like, was the New Dealers just retired? You know, they went in at 25, they retired at 65. 40 years later, they're done. They're out, and the next generation that replaced them was just not as competent. It's more bureaucratic. The large agencies just don't
I
work
think
as
there was
well.
some of that. I think there was some of that. I think World War II brought about a large social change, and then all the people who were trained before World War II retired in the early 70s.
Gotcha.
There was the sort of boomer uprising with whatever happened there, large scale social change, basically, where the boomers were very, in some cases, rightly disillusioned with the society that they had inherited, and they didn't want to follow that path. I think there were economic problems that we don't entirely understand, at least in the sort of default consciousness. I don't understand that stuff very well myself. I've been trying to, but I still don't feel like I have a handle on it. But there was a reason that they had to go off the gold standard, or they felt that they did.
Yeah.
There's reasons that a bunch of the outsourcing and offshoring and so on that gutted kind of the Rust Belt. There's a reason that stuff happened. And I think another one actually is just globalization. Like,
Gotcha.
What you had after the war was America had conquered the world, more or less, and America and the Soviet Union together, but had conquered the world. And suddenly there was this new order. In the new order, there was a lot of opportunity to make use of labor that had previously not been available. And basically the American society, or whatever the deal was in American society, no longer had negotiating leverage against, I don't know, we'll call it capital. No longer had
increasing competition because
a bunch of negotiating leverage by sort of the normal healthy fabric of society and normal people had been lost in that globalization process. And so it broke the kind of the class relationship in the United States, I think. Like, there had been a collaboration, not necessarily a good one in all cases, but from the New Deal basically to late 60s, early 70s, there had been something like a deal worked out, and then that deal had been broken by a bunch of these historical factors that we've been mentioning, plus this globalization issue. And so you see afterwards very much the profits of, I mean, not to use like Occupy Wall Street language, but like the rich kept getting richer, right? And other people stopped getting richer, and things otherwise sort of stagnated in a lot of ways. Though, again, from the environmentalist perspective, a lot of mess got cleaned up as well,
right?
At least in North America. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't have a handle on the whole thing. I have a bunch of these little contributing factors. I don't have a monocausal explanation for sure. And I don't think necessarily that there is.
Gotcha. No, I like that. I'm curious, you mentioned this breakdown of, perhaps class relationships, and it's unclear whether it was just like they had the opportunity to globalize and, move the factory out and you can make more money. Management can make a lot more money if we just blow up the factory and move it. Yeah. In fact, I know someone whose entire profession was taking these factories, boxing them up and sending them to China. And,
ouch.
I mean, it's really like, it was terrible to drive around North Carolina and do this. Do you think what happened to elite responsibility? Was it just, they're always selfish and they finally had the opportunity? Or is there some sociology of elite responsibility where,
I think
this degrades?
I mean, yeah, it degrades. So this is a little bit complex, I guess, but so the New Deal, you mentioned the New Deal. The New Deal obviously was something of a circulation of elites, and a new class of people kind of came in with new ideas and pushed out the old people who maybe hadn't been performing very well at that point because they had degenerated. And I mean, you see this with after that kind of the idea of the WASP being very much like a derogatory term, whereas before that there had been this kind of sense of nobility attached to not that term in particular because it hadn't been used before that, but that class of people. And yeah, so there was an elite that had something like sort of aristocratic sense of responsibility towards the rest of society, and you know they'd done the things that they had done, and it wasn't all perfect, but there had been something like that. But I think the paradigm that it had been operating under necessarily undermined itself for various reasons. And then sort of when there was that New Deal, a new guard came in, you know, a lot of communists in the government at that time, and other things, but I don't think it was just that, but just generally like different people, different ideas, very much not believing in the old order. And but I don't think they had any sort of real replacement order or real sense of responsibility. There was the immediate issue of, I mean, I think under FDR, sort of the New Deal, there was this vision of kind of like building up society. Then there was World War II. There was very much this existential need to mobilize in this shared way. And that, but yeah, I mean, the whole thing kind of got exhausted, like we were saying, and broke down eventually in the 70s. But it had already kind of burned out. But I think one additional issue that is important here is just that the way people think about what they're trying to get out of public life. I don't know if it's changed or whatever, but the way it is that I think is the problem is that you have people kind of chasing their own individual material interests, and like this is, you know, the commies will tell you this is the interests of capital as a class, right? It's capital is sort of like inherently interested in just its own perpetuation from sort of like a aggregate individual perspective, not from a solid, like the key fact is that capital doesn't actually have solidarity in a true strategic sense. It is not capable of acting on shared plans that go beyond financial interest. Gotcha. Because of just the way the thing is set up. So I think that doesn't help. And it goes way beyond just that sort of very materialistic analysis. I think there's a whole bunch of stuff like that where the ideology and aspirations of the elite have unfortunately become too narrow and don't have enough of that sort of coordination spirit, the spirit of actually kind of having solidarity with each other to run a government to accomplish whatever ambitious goal that goes beyond position within that society. It's more like, we have this society, what are we going to use it for, rather than we are in this society, how are we going to boost ourselves up within it? Do you see the difference there?
Yeah.
And you know, obviously the former only is possible in certain material contexts, but I think that's sort of one of the core issues that I think is most important. It's just like, we need to build up a consciousness, sort of a new, I mean, maybe it's the old way of thinking about government, but from our perspective, it's a new way of thinking about government, which is that there is, in fact, there are elite people in charge of the government, and they, or we, depending on who they are, have to see society as something that is useful to them, that they are building up for some further end, rather than you know, trying to just gain or preserve position within society. And I think
Gotcha.
This is this key problem of social engineering, of like, you know, building the right social technologies, of how do you actually supply an elite with that kind of ambition and that kind of coordination. Like it's not just like, oh yeah, everyone has to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and develop a different like ideology. It's you have to actually build something there to accomplish that. You need to build a new paradigm of how we govern society. You need to build its institutions. You need to build its supply lines. Like, supply lines are important in ideas as well as material goods, right? Like we don't operate on ideas that we cook up in our own heads most of the time. Most of the time we're getting our ideas from our sources. And so any idea that you expect to exist in society must also therefore have some institution that is perpetuating that idea. So you have to think, okay, if you want society to have this kind of responsibility where the elite is leading society for some purpose, then you have to have institutions that are producing that. What does that look like, et cetera, et cetera. So this is like the first big problem that I sort of focus on with Palladium is like, how do we build that kind of consciousness, and not just like, whining about it and saying, oh yeah, wouldn't it be great if the elite thought like this, but thinking about what are the particular kinds of institutions we need to build for that. We don't necessarily like make Palladium about this, except somewhat obliquely, but we sort of see Palladium as this kind of thing. We're trying to produce that kind of institution.
Gotcha. I really like that. And is part of that just, trying to paint a picture of a definite future that we can get everybody to buy into? Because it seems like one of the big problems with this liberal order, it's like, well, just go figure it out. But
right.
Each person go figure it out, right? But it's like, oh God, like how do you actually reach some better point if there's not like a definite roadmap?
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is sort of Peter Thiel's dichotomy between the indefinite and the definite optimist. And yeah, I think definiteness is important. I mean, the key fact of definiteness is that you're making definite plans. It's not just that you have particular beliefs about the future, it's that you're making particular plans and you're acting on them in a coordinated manner. And yeah, I think the like big definite thing that we need to be working on right now is, again, this transformation to excuse me, this transformation to a new form of institutional consciousness about how we govern society, and a new paradigm of how you actually build social technology in society, what that's for, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's and that, I guess that itself is actually a definite view of human institutions. It's a view where these things are technology. We can plan them, we can build them. There's all these caveats that we have to add to that in terms of where's the information coming from, who is actually making those actions. You can't just do this central planning naive, like cut everything up into rectangles and like say that's how it's going to be and send out the plan. That doesn't work. It was tried in the 20th century. It was, bad paradigm. Brasilia is sort of the best case outcome. Worst case, of course, is stuff like what happens in the USSR.
Right.
Yeah, you can't necessarily do that totally top down thing, but you still have to have a theory of where you're going, how you're doing it, what your plan is, and that plan can be distributed throughout society. But there is a plan, and yeah, so that's a more definite view of things, and I think we need to be going towards a more definite view. And I think part of that actually is the plan to get there, the plan from here to there. We need to be working on that, and that is this definite dream that. I put out this article on Palladium called A New Golden Age of Governance, where we were sort of championing this idea of sort of this definite re-engineering of society towards particular ends. And that's me trying to rally people around that kind of thinking, trying to take the what we have with Palladium and say, okay, we're actually trying to lead people in this direction. We want to think more in this direction. We want to approach life more in this direction, and we want to imagine a definite transformation in this direction. And then I supplemented that with two other major kind of definite directions, vectors that we have to be pursuing. The first is reindustrialization, or as you might say, completing the Industrial Revolution. So our current analysis is basically that post-industrial is fake, There is no post-industrial. There is only industrial. The next paradigm has not actually been cooked up. So what we need to be doing is mastering the industrial. And in North America and the West, that means we need to get industry back because we've dropped the ball. And people have this idea like, well, yeah, we're a developed country or something. I think that's fake too. There is no such thing as being a developed country. You're either developing or not developing. And I think a sort of more concrete way to say that is just tons of room left, even with current technology, entirely current technology, even technology that was available in the 60s. There is tons of room left for what we could do in terms of just material development, build more capital, build more stuff, build more trains, build better planes, build better computers, build more factories, build bigger and better stuff, build more efficiently, improve the efficiencies, get everything smaller, lighter impact, right? Like govern the whole thing better. There's obviously there's a lot of small innovations involved in that, but people often lean on these kind of like sort of whiz bang big technologies like, oh yeah, fusion will save us, right? But no, actually, we're not even using the nuclear technology we have. Why do you think new nuclear technology would make any difference? You have to be, I think like this is sort of before we should even be talking about technology, we should be talking about maxing out the technology that we have. The industrial revolution that we have not completed it. We are maybe 10% on like, I'm just going to put that on a geometric mean, not even linearly, right? If we were linearly 10%, great, we're almost done, right? But I think it's like 10% in terms of total amount of time, right? So that's one, this big industrial transformation that I think we have to make.
And I want to jump in there. Was that, I was going to mention nuclear power. Was that kind of your frustration as an engineer? You're looking at all these technologies like, wow, we can keep designing more technology, but we have to have some method to actually get this into the real world. And if we can't build more nuclear power plants, it doesn't matter, right? Like if it's just disallowed for governance reasons. Like that's
I mean, that was one of the background issues. I mean, it wasn't really central, but it's obviously a great example, right? Yeah. It's like we have this thing that works.
It works. We know it works. Everybody knows it works.
Nuclear technology, and there are problems with it. But you know what else there's problems with is like gain of function research on like
lots of problems
pathogens,
with that.
Right? Like so, there's a lot of research that we're doing that's let's say that the death toll is a lot higher than nuclear.
Right.
So I don't think that's the real barrier. I think whatever. I don't want to get into the nuclear thing, but I think we should be doing nuclear.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of them. And so on this problem of sort of completing the Industrial Revolution, I think this is a major direction we need to be pursuing as a society. And I think to do that, we actually need some new social technologies because, so we had an article recently by Sam Oburia called The End of Industrial Society. And he made, I think, a very important point, which is that industrial society had depended for bootstrapping on a bunch of social technology that pre-existed industrial society in terms of human capital, especially, and how we produce human capital and all those networks and institutions that were around that. And it had, in the course of industrializing society, we actually destroyed those institutions. And now we are left having undermined our own foundation. There are a bunch of things that we can't even do anymore for reason of having undermined our foundations. And so part of the project of completing the Industrial Revolution is literally just figuring out how to keep it sustainable, not even environmentally sustainable, but socially sustainable. How do you even keep that thing going and have it not decay into this post-industrial malaise? And again, the post-industrial thing is not some new glorious frontier. It's actually just exhaustion.
Right. It's like the California fires, and you don't have lights on anymore, and
Right, right.
it's just like nuttiness.
So yeah, so that's a key part of that, is like we actually have to re-engineer the social foundations of industry. And again, this is why I precede it with, we need a new golden age of social engineering, right? We need to be able to build social institutions. We need to be able to conceive of how we're governing society, and actually get that skill of building those things. I think that skill has not been produced at wide scale in recent history. Maybe it has never been. Maybe it's only ever done by kind of these heroic founder figures, these people who figure out how to do it, or these little networks that are able to build something new socially. But whatever our theory is of how that happens, we have to figure out how to make it happen. Anyway, so that's the first two of my big directions that I think we want to pursue, and that we sort of try to put forward with Palladium. The third one is where we sort of integrate these environmental issues. So obviously we live on a finite planet, and we're growing rapidly. There's a bunch of negative impacts that we have as a result of that, and things coming down the pipe like global warming. And we have to figure out how to manage those impacts. A lot of people approach these issues as sort of, they oppose the industrial path and the environmental path as if these are different things.
Right.
And I think they're not different things. I think deindustrialization is not the correct answer to environmental challenges. And the way I see it is more like, can we take responsibility for the good things that are going on in Earth's ecosystems and the good things that are going on in Earth's climate systems and other natural systems? Can we take responsibility for that and accelerate those using management and technology? Can we make them better? Can we actively restore ecosystems using our best abilities? Can we actively build ecosystems where we want them? Can we actively maintain the climate to be what we want it to be? Can we actively maintain carbon levels to be, as low as is consistent with all the other factors that we have to balance, are like cognitive function and agricultural productivity and et cetera. Like I bring up cognitive function just because at about 1,000 ppm, you start to see cognitive effects.
Yeah,
you start to see cognitive effects of CO2 pollution, and that's not too far off. So we can't just let that run out and block out the sun or whatever. Right. Like that's not a solution. Anyway, so we have to actually take responsibility to manage the planet as a planet, and we haven't done that yet. But this is one of these big transformations that we have to make. It's a big, definite transformation over the next century, let's say. So those, and I think these all actually feed into each other, right? The problem of managing human society is very much this gardening problem, right? Whereas, right. And the problem of taking responsibility for the feedback systems, the cybernetic systems of nature in our environment, that is a governance problem. It's something we have to learn to govern the planet. We have to learn to govern ecosystems. These are both industrial problems. They both happen within the industrial paradigm. We have to deploy industrial solutions. The Industrial Revolution is in some sense most centrally characterized by taking an instrumental view of human relationships and human organizations. So, before the Industrial Revolution, I think people have heard this anecdote a few times, but there was resistance to ideas like these labor-saving innovations, like the flying shuttle in the loom that makes it automatic instead of manual to pass the thread back and forth when you're weaving fabric. That's sort of this obvious idea. It could have been done at any time, but as a labor-saving innovation, as something that would change the relationship to the work, it was morally resisted. And so there's actually a moral transformation in how you're seeing production and how you're seeing human organization, and especially economic organization, in at the core of the Industrial Revolution. So this is a point I make occasionally, is that the Industrial Revolution is actually first and foremost a moral transformation, not because it has moral effects like lifting people out of poverty, but because it has moral inputs like changing how we view human relationships and production and our life. So so I basically that's a relationship between that governance problem, that moral problem of improving our governance relations, and the industrial problem. Also, of course, common relationships with the planets. So these three things that I'm laying out, they're kind of very related, I think, and they together form this definite vision, at least as far as what I'm pursuing. This is the vision I think we need to be chasing after, especially the core necessary component of that, which is a transformation in how we govern society. So that's my big vision, the thing that I'm doing with Palladium, or at least one part of it, one expression of it. But that's the actual visionary part.
I love that. I think that's so important. And I do get the sense, you've got this sense of trying to actually go and engineer, society in a way like where most social scientists seem to be more like, I guess, Hayekian or something, where the specific details,
indefinite.
Like, yeah, I'm just talking like generally, right? But do you think that gave you a unique perspective, like just like thinking through like you practically, how do we go and design this versus just like letting it happen? It's just going to evolve how it evolves.
I think what you're asking is where that came from.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where it came from. Let me think about that for a couple seconds here. But it might it might be related to kind of my sort of engineering background. I actually don't think it directly does. I think I just did a lot of thinking about philosophy, a lot of engagement with the established ideas like utilitarianism and, these more sort of indirect views on things. And I did a lot of engagement with that stuff. And I've just chewed through a lot of ideas over the years and settled towards this very active paradigm of how you have to deal with these things. And I think, so various places we can blame, if we need to blame somebody, or credit as it were. But you mentioned the definite indefinite diversion or division, and that's from Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, his book. I found that persuasive when I read that. Samo Burya has this idea of great founder theory, that social technologies come as a result of concerted action by especially talented individuals and small groups who undertake a social engineering program to build new social technologies that they implement on society. I found that persuasive. Ideas, just as I studied kind of government and the problems of government, the problems of politics and so on, one of the core ideas that I came to was that almost everything in society happens, if not by design, at least by implicit intention on the part of the ruling class, and including things like revolutions, which are very often actually just fights within the ruling class, or
just internecine kind of struggles.
Yeah, so things sort of cooked up by the ruling class to sort of create some new. It's not fully like Gnostic total separation between the elite and the spectacle. The elite also live in the spectacle, but there's a definite sense in which there are people with very outsized power, and what's going on is largely the result of what they are trying to do and what they, if not explicitly, what they implicitly intend to do. And so, and once you it's easy to hide power, but it's also really easy to project power and in hidden ways. And so power generally has a much larger impact than you think. And the result of that is that you really have to grapple hard with the problem of what do you do with power. And so this is another kind of source on this way of thinking, grappling with that problem. Okay, power is actually more important than we thought, even. And what do we do with that? How do we actually use that power? That immediately gets you into this problem of governance. Yeah, and anyway, so yeah, we've produced Palladium to attempt to answer these questions.
I love that. I love that. So I've got a couple overrated, underrated. We go through quickly in the last couple minutes, if that's okay.
Sure.
So my first one is Colin Chapman. Overrated, underrated?
Colin Chapman, underrated. Colin Chapman is the founder of Lotus. He single-handedly dominated Formula One for like 2 decades. And yeah, total genius.
That's all. Yeah, I just got out of my friend's Black Avora a couple minutes ago. It's quite. I got to say, he did a good job. Natalism, overrated, underrated?
You're just getting this off my Twitter feed or something. Yeah, natalism, of course, underrated. I think people don't have enough kids. More specifically, I think people have these weird ideas that, like, you know, material factors are holding them back or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't believe it. People have all these weird ideas about, you know, not bringing people into the world. They sort of have this implicitly misanthropic viewpoint that their existence is net negative. I find it hard to empathize with that. You know,
it's very common with environmentalists. I feel like that's a very common thread I hear.
Yeah. I mean, I think people definitely have an environmental impact, but, you know, the reason we care about the environment is because we're people and we love life.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But yeah, so yeah, I think people have a lot of really weird ideas around having kids. I love kids. I love having kids. I have 2 of my own, hopefully more on the way. And I think creating good people and talented people is something that is within our power as parents, especially among the sort of privileged demographics that actually think explicitly about this and act on their ideology. Right. And I think that is one of the most important things that we can do for the future. You know, this is something that's very obvious to me as even as an ambitious person that's like, you know, I've actually built some of the stuff that I've intended to build, Palladium, for example.
Yeah.
It's obvious to me that a huge chunk of my impact on the future is going to be not my work, but my kids. And that's something I feel like people oppose those things very inappropriately. They think, oh yeah, I'm not going to have kids so that I can have this very outsized impact on the future. And like, you know, someone else will have kids and I won't have to worry about it, you know? And it's like, what are you thinking, man? Right. No, the biggest impact you can have is on having good kids. That's my opinion. As I don't know, I think I've achieved some success in the things that I've been trying to do, and I think I will achieve more. And I think that my kids will be a large fraction of my impact.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's very important and somewhat overlooked. Chinese state capacity, overrated, underrated?
Oof. I think everyone sort of realizes the state capacity that they have. And so I think it might be slightly overrated right now.
Gotcha.
I think people still probably don't realize they haven't viscerally been hit by the ideological shock of grappling with the fact of Chinese state capacity. Like how much that should challenge your worldview and how much you should demand in response to that.
Why can they do things? We can't do things.
Right. Like so that is an existential critique to yes. Our current paradigm. And people don't follow that chain of reasoning enough. They should, but that is slightly separate from exactly how much state capacity they have. Basically, I think people are underrating the importance of Chinese state capacity, but slightly overrating how much they actually have.
Gotcha.
And Yeah, there's people, there's sort of this idea going around, China is super competent, like totally has the future under control, and like, etc. They're perfect government, blah blah blah. We can't stand a chance. But actually, I think they're on a very similar path to us. They're just a little bit earlier in the process,
Yeah.
and they're going to run into a lot of problems. I mean, I wish them luck, but that's also, I just think that there's a lot of problems there. I see the ways that they are grappling with many of the same fundamental issues and have no way of solving them. In particular, I mean, you mentioned the natalism thing, having kids. I think
Demographic collapse.
China has problems there. People say China's demographic problem is going to like save America or something. Like that's total cope. America has worse demographic problems. I'm happy to litigate that at length, but yeah. And then the other one is like ideology among the elite in China. There's a reason that Xi has to be putting a lot of effort into getting them on the true and straight path of socialism, because they're not exactly on that straight path. And then succession.
It seems like a big
I'm
challenge.
not super well versed in Chinese internal politics, but my understanding from people who are is that there's no obvious kind of next generation being groomed.
That sounds like a real problem. Well, Wolf, we're coming up to the top of the hour. I really wanted to thank you for coming on. Do you have any parting thoughts, and where can people find Palladium?
Yes. Okay. So parting thoughts. One of our favorite ways to present all these ideas is through our print magazine. And our print magazine sort of came about with the idea of what we call luxury political theory. The idea is, we're going to take, it's a luxury to be able to develop these ideas, right? But I think the ideas are very important, and I think they deserve a luxurious packaging. So we put our best ideas in our print magazine, which is coming out quarterly. We've already done Palladium 1, which was the first one. This summer, we have Palladium 2 coming out. So basically, we take these ideas on particular topics. The first issue was our overall program, Governance Futurism. We tried to put in sort of the most directly governance problem articulating articles that we had. And we accompanied them with my essay, The Golden Age, A New Golden Age of Governance, which laid out the argument that I was going through earlier. And I think that it's very important to be producing physical artifacts of the thoughts that we really take seriously. And I think it's a great way to consume the material. And I think that as a luxury item, it's sort of something that's beautiful on your coffee table, on your bookshelf, something you can show to other people. I mean, this is something that big feedback that we've been getting, right, is people love kind of showing other people their copy of Palladium 1, right?
They're beautiful. They're really beautiful.
It's got all these great ideas in it. It says something about you. It says something important. So I'm just going to plug subscribing to Palladium 1, or subscribing rather to Palladium's print edition, which is quarterly. It's not for sale. You can't get individual copies. You have to be one of our donors. And so please do become a subscriber on Patreon and support the project. I think we're doing really important work. I think we're doing some of the most important work in the space of thoughts around politics and governance. And we really need support to be able to do that. And we get that support from the community, and we reward that with things like our print edition. So yeah, please do subscribe. I think it's very much worth it. And we'd love to see you in the internal conversations that we have.
Excellent. And is it palladium.com? Is that right?
Palladiummag.com/subscribe.
Okay. I'll put the link down in the description.
Great.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this has been a fun conversation. Otherwise, I think we laid out some very interesting models here.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Wolf.
Yeah. Thanks so much.